Sorry, just got back from the coffee shop in the Diet Coke store. Good morning, everyone. Are you there? Can you hear me? Hello? Live across the world. Good morning, Rob. Good morning, Chris. Good morning, folks. Feel free to let me know if you can hear me, because that's always going to be my always going to be my nervousness, is that for some reason the audio doesn't work. They should have like a little audio reader. I got everything else up on top here. Oh, thank you, Chris. Hey, I was dyeing clothes last night, so if my hands look all weird and colored, sometimes that's what I like to do, is take things I don't wear and turn them into something that I might want to wear more with a little bit of dye. I'm an artist. Oh, there we go. I can see clearly now. So my dad had a bad night last night, and he's been pretty sick, and he's 84. So when you get older, you things happen, and he has had a few strokes and a few mini strokes, and he had a kind of a rough night last night. So it's such a strange life. When my dad was in prison, he was my age, and some people say, "Why do you always talk about him in prison?" It's because it's the time we really connected. We really, connected during those years. So that's why I refer those, not to be like, "Oh, sorry, sad old times." That was just the times that were actually, some of them are really good, and that's the thing, is Freud talks about that. Sometimes you'll look back on the sad times and realize they were some of the best times, and the things you learn from those times. So I believe my buddy DE is becoming a bishop today. He was a bishop elect, and DE, D stands for Donnie, and E stands for Earl. Donald Earl Polk is becoming a bishop, and he's the guy who told me, my buddy and my brother, who told me about grace, and I'm so happy that I'm happy for him. He's kind of following in the legacy of his uncle, and of course Carlton Pearson, who was a friend and mentor. So that's really great. So last week we did a little bit about those kind of like reclaiming some old scriptures, kind of like verses that I felt that have been were abused through my life, and always made me think of, it's like you kind of like have these bad memories with them, like they were maybe used against you and stuff, and it's just so amazing to me. Like, I did a couple videos talking about them because I really wanted people to watch it, because I think we need reformation horribly, but unfortunately, unless some billionaire comes out and be like, reform the church, it feels like nobody's listening. I don't know who we're listening to now. And some of the voices that are out there that are being heard don't seem to be talking about reformation. I mean, a lot of them are doing great work, so I can understand why that might not be their focus, but there's so much that needs to be changed, and so much that needs to be talked about, and can be talked about in the midst of loving others and helping others, and and fighting for human rights as well. But it's one of those things that it's like we could make it broader by broader through some sort of reformation. Phyllis Tickle believed that that was going to happen at this time, and I kind of believe it's going to happen. I just think it's going to happen slowly, and maybe we'll look back and realize it slowly happened over years, because everybody's attention was based on the horrors in the world and the doom scrolling and whatever the algorithm wants you to see. So not feeling super peppy today. I mean, I just found out before I got here about my dad's how bad his night was, and so I've got to make some decisions and things like that. So, anyhow, but we're back. But back to that talk, and for some reason I did two. I think I did 2 videos on that talk, and I don't usually do extra videos to promote a talk, but I felt it was important for folks to kind of reclaim the verses. And one person was like, "Oh, that seems like it'd be quite a feat, to reclaim those." And it was like, not really, it was like just reading the rest of the verses, just reading the rest of the paragraph. It's amazing that sometimes the paragraph is what reading a paragraph and not weaponizing scripture as these little fortune cookies of wrath, fortunes of wrath, the name of my next book. It's like not using them that way is quite amazing. Context is quite amazing. I mean, I'm glad there's verses because it makes it easier for me, but it's like funny because you get people who will get into like verse battles and it's just out of context sentences. It's like, it would be like using people's quotes to, battle things. And you always find out famous quotes aren't quite what we thought they were. Like when Nietzsche said God is dead, or religion is the opium of the masses. It's like, keep reading, keep reading, keep reading. And so that's valuable stuff for us to keep reading. And often I found when I kept reading and kept studying, I found something that was more inclusive and that was actually good news. And found grace through that. And or I think what Paul may call the Spirit, our faith. So I'm excited to be here today. I want to thank everybody who's been supporting Revolution by retweeting and sharing on Instagram. Please at us when you share those so we can thank you and share those as well. So when you share our stories or you share these talks, please put, whatever format it is, connect us. Like if it's on X, connect Revolution. If it's on Instagram, connect Revolution, or myself, or both of them. Both would be nice. Or Threads, or Facebook. We're on Facebook a lot. That's where the majority of people seem to be for Revolution. So you can do that. But I also just really want to thank you folks who showed up financially, because this has been super tough. It's super hard to focus and study and do all this stuff when your family when you don't know what's going to happen to your father, to your loved ones. Anybody who's been through that knows that it's just, well, your brain goes into a different way of thinking. But for me, it's also a highlighter of life, is when you feel that loss is on its way, is that you come in more focused and you realize the mundane things about life every day that are mundane, and the things that we take for granted, and the things that the importance that we put on ridiculous things. So anyway, so we were like $300 short for our pay period, and our pay period's not just for me, but it's also our bills and stuff. And I put on a letter, and you guys showed up, and I want to say thank you for that. We really do. I would really like to raise the budget so we don't have to raise money all the time and ask for finances all the time. I'd love to get the budget where it needs to be. but we're gonna need like a miracle for that to happen. One of you guys need to be playing the lottery. Build a time machine, go back in time, invest in Apple, send us some tithes. We can keep going. But anyway, so there's that. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. But I did want to say thank you for you guys showing up. I mean, it really helps. I mean, it's great. It's like amazing when we're able to like pay bills and do things and not have to worry about that. Me and Josh are talking about like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to film this just on my computer? We bought a new computer a couple years ago, raised money in the computer, and the computer got destroyed because a friend of ours was struggling with drug addiction and things happened. So it would be nice not to just do all this stuff on the phone. I mean, everything I do, emails, texts, it's all phone. None of it's no computer, which is fine. I mean, we keep the budget low. We got lights and the nice background. So we're in Galatians, and this is the longest we've gone through Galatians, and I'm really excited about that because we've been going through and like with a fine-tooth comb, which can be kind of boring in some ways. I think ultimately as a set, a collection, a series, this will be a pretty good series on the book. But also, going through with the fine tooth also reminds us like what was going on at that time. What was, what is the context? What were people thinking? How different were people from us? And I think that's important to remember and realize that we've evolved and we've changed over 2,000 years. Unfortunately, I feel like, what I'd like to see is us get close to the earlier Christianity, the earlier, like the earlier 400 or first 400, 500 years of Christianity. I feel like the past 1,500 years have been become something else. And that's what I was talking about last week is like, who you don't hang out with and what you don't do and you wearing silly shirts and, condemning people and tearing people apart and becoming like Christian nationalists. It's not even like the United States is the nation. It's like Christianity is the nation, and it's like that's not what anybody wanted to see. That's not what Paul wanted to see. Paul's fighting against that with the Judaizers who have come into Gaul, the Galatians, and are speaking Galatians, and Jewish nationalism is playing a part in what's going on with the Galatians in this book. And he's trying to be like, no, we've got to get past this, we got to be a community of people, of human beings. And when we see this pushed more and more here, and so I think it's timeless for so much of that because we see so much of that happening in the world and so many nations becoming so self-focused. America is pretty good at it, right? So back to Galatians. So Galatians 3 is where we're at. And we just got out of basically a little just previously on Galatians. Paul has confronted Peter about not sitting with Gentiles. This book is a rebuke in a way to the Gentiles for falling back into traditions and the law. And there have been some folks who've come into the Church of Galatia and been like, hey, listen, Paul's not a real apostle, and the only way to really fulfill his work is by being circumcised and by going back to the law and celebrating certain things and not eating certain meats and by being separatists. And there's this thing that always seems to come into Christianity, and it seems to always be this Achilles heel of Christianity, is to somehow be a separatist religion. I was talking about all that stuff and all the funny T-shirts and the bracelets and things like that. And, I remember stuff like people like, meet me at the flag, we're going to show up to school an hour early and pray around the flag so people know who we are. We're going to carry our Bibles so people know we're better than them. I mean, that was the vibe. Like, I'm going to heaven. I don't drink alcohol or smoke the cigarettes, and it was just one of those things where if you really wanted to be a radical youth leader, you would just be like, just, I know you're partying, I know you're doing all this stuff, but know that you're loved and know that you're accepted. And how cool would that be? Rather than you've got to win your school to Jesus. It's like, no wonder there's so many like anti-Christian, like ex-Christian podcasts where I was an evangelical teacher and my youth pastor didn't give me pizza and made me pass out testaments. Testaments, remember? They were mints, and the wrapper had a scripture in them. Made me pass out testaments at school, And I was a nerd. I get it. And then there was also a lot of really horrible things as well. But a lot of that was just man-made crap, because that's the Achilles heel of, like I said, of Christianity. It was this we would need to be exclusive. You need to do something special to fulfill this, and we need to be an exclusive group of people, and we need to change people, and then as when we saw that, we talked about loving people and showing more grace and all this other stuff. So I was just like, oh, that's really, really crazy, there's way more inclusion here and a lot less exclusion than, when it's saying being renewed and not be of this world. It's saying not be of this world is not to be of this world, is not to be an exclusive person, is not to judge your enemies, is not to avoid people, is not to get revenge, but it's actually to love and tolerate. Oh, shoot. I was told the complete opposite growing up. So a lot of people who are like the former Christian, ex-Christian podcast, a lot of that is just because, like, hey, you should be pissed because what you were told isn't what's in here, and some of it is in here, but if you don't know scholarship, you don't realize that it's not. There's forgeries in here too, So I'm sorry that this has been such a suspect device to abuse you. So that's what Paul's arguing against here. Is Paul saying, like, we gotta, like, this isn't about being exclusive. This isn't about following certain rules and regulations. This is about faith in Christ. This is freedom in Christ. And to make really clear, faith is a gift. The Spirit is a gift. It's not something that you earn or you get because you've done something. So that's really interesting as well. I mean, I remember I talked about that years ago at Cornerstone, and I got in a lot of trouble there by the powers that be, because they said, oh, that's just too much grace, and that's not true. You have to long for holiness. It's not a gift. And I was like, well, if you look at the Greek and the Hebrew and it's funny when people don't like what you find out when you study, when you start going in depth. Like, scholarship will usually lead you to heresy. Good scholarship leads to heresy. And unfortunately, then you're like a voice crying in the wilderness, because you're realizing that almost everything you've been raised in is actually a type of heresy. But, I know you are, but what am I really isn't the best argument. So I think the best argument is, how do we disagree well, and how do we have conversations, and how do we build better relationships that make actual change? So we're going to go through part of Galatians 3 today. What we find is Paul right here going, "Oh, foolish Galatians, he says, you foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly exhibited as crucified. The only thing I want to learn from you is this: did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law, or by believing what you have heard? Are you so foolish? Have you now started with the Spirit? Are you now ending it with the flesh? Did you experience so much for nothing?" And remember, he just said, I'm not one of those who treats the grace of God as not one of those who treats the grace of God as I don't nullify the grace of God, because I don't make Christ's death worth nothing, is what he said in the last part of Galatians 2. Goes on to say, if it really was for nothing, well then, does God supply you with the Spirit and work miracles among you by what you're doing, or the works of the law, or by believing what you heard? Now, this is really a loaded thing, and this is what happens when you start bringing in scholarship here, is you start to learn a little bit more about these issues and what's happening being said here, and everything is kind of loaded. One way, Paul is confronting now his audience, the Church of Galatia, the Gauls, if you will, just the way he probably confronted Peter. Now, when he goes, "You foolish Galatians," this hit a little bit harder. I mean, this was a real hard-hitting statement because this was a stereotype that a lot of people in Judaism had towards Gentiles. You know, that they were just foolish, that they were idiots. They were sinners by birth, and they weren't chosen, and they were, second-class citizens, and so, you foolish Gentiles. But he says Galatians here, so he includes you foolish Galatians. So he's just putting it all out there for everybody, and calls them fools. And he goes, "Who has bewitched you?" And now here's another thing that a lot of us don't probably think about or realize is that, and you might think, well, of course, Jay, you're believing in God and stuff, all this, but like when he says bewitched, like they believed in, people at this time, religious people at this time believed in sorcery and magic and things like that. Of course, they were theists, but they only believed in one God, so monotheists. So they believed that, of course, most of that magic and all that kind of stuff came from the devil or angels or things like that. And you might be saying, well, what's the difference than that, than believing just, maybe we should not watch Harry Potter. The point is to show you how different things were at that time. The point there, the thinking about that is he's literally being like, did like someone put an evil eye on you? Did you get like a spell cast on you? Like, is he being sarcastic, or is he being somewhat real? But at this time, these people would have been like, oh, like it would have meant something different than like if I was like, did David Copperfield put a mind trance on you? You think, oh, he's being funny. But this, he's like saying, like, you guys are, what's happened to you? You're acting like you've been bewitched. You've acting like you're possessed. You're acting like fools. And this time, these people would have understood this as being a very firm rebuke. And when he says, before, you had seen Christ before your eyes, this was this was such a used thing at times because they didn't have films or movies or things like that, or books, and there wasn't the printing press, and this was what was it? An ocular demonstration is what often teachers would call it. Is like you would feel like you've seen things. And I can remember this when I used to read a lot of comic books. Sometimes I would think I saw a cartoon of the book that I read, and then I realized, like, oh, it was a comic book, but I must have animated it in my head, or I read the DC comic Kingdom Come, but I read it in the just in the book form, not in the comic book form. And when I read it, the novelization of Kingdom Come. And it's funny, then when I picked up the comic book, I remember thinking like, oh, this isn't as good as I remember, but it was because the first time I read it, it was how I was picturing it. So here his thing is, he's going like, you used to see this as you used to see Christ as clearly as though I had shown you a picture. Like in your mind, you've seen this. Another thing we don't talk a lot about, Paul, is that the first account of resurrection in the New Testament, with the earliest account of resurrection in the New Testament, is not a physical resurrection. It's a spiritual. It's a vision that Paul has when he's on the road to Damascus. Paul is the first one, because his works were written like 30, 40, 50, 60 years before the Gospels, to say, Christ showed up to me, but it was in a vision. And then in Mark, I believe, there is no physical resurrection. So it's interesting to see, like these earlier books, that resurrection was something that was vision. It was a vision. It was something that's seen. So, these are things that we just don't talk about, or we don't hear a lot about, or maybe it comes up in a discussion. But I think these are things worth talking about, and thinking how Paul's work is so close to that. Here he goes, did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law or by believing? You know, he was very clear to these folks that the Spirit is a gift. The idea of grace is a gift. It is not something that you earn. That's why there is no difference between Jew nor Gentile, male nor female, free or slave. We are all equal. That he's saying that this isn't something that comes from your breeding. This isn't something that comes from being a chosen people. This is a gift for all people. And he'll get into that because he's going to talk about Abraham. And Abraham would obviously be something that would be important to Gentiles as Christians, is because Abraham was originally a Gentile. Um, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But he's also seen as the father of faith. So that's also why it's important that Paul brings up Abraham in all this conversation. So he keeps saying, does God supply you with the Spirit and work miracles among you by doing the works of the law? Or are you believing what you heard? And his argument is he's saying it's by believing what you heard. It's by receiving that gift. It's by realizing that there was a gift there and you took that gift. It's not by the works of the law. Now people say, well, James says faith without works is dead. But I think what James is saying is it's almost like a stillborn kind of thing, is what he's saying for others. Because he goes, if you walk after he says that, he goes, if you walk past someone, you see them in hunger, or you see them in need, or you see them in cold, and you have a jacket, or you have ways to help them, and you just go, eat well, have a great day, bye-bye, and you ignore them, your faith is useless. And I think that might be what he's trying to say. But famously, Martin Luther, the reformist, called James the Epistle of Straw. He was not a fan of it. So back here, let's jump back into Galatians 3:5. Well then, does God supply you with the Spirit and work miracles among you by doing the works of the law, or by you believing in what Jesus heard? Now this is where he goes in, because they're probably what's happening here in Galatians is that the Judaizers, the group that are pushing back on Paul and saying that Paul's not a good enough apostle, and that Paul's tickling ears and not preaching the correct thing, is they probably used Abraham against him. Because, Abraham, kind of the father of faith, was a Gentile who converted and eventually did get circumcised. And so did Isaac. But, who else got circumcised? So did Ishmael. So, so Paul's going to push back a little bit on this, but still use Abraham to kind of push back on what his critics are probably using against him. Just as Abraham believed in God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. So you see, those who believe are the descendants of Abraham. So he believed that when Abraham, that moment that Abraham, because Abraham did good works and bad works and did these different things, but it's also 450 years before the law was given. What he's trying to say, though, is that it wasn't like salvation over time. It wasn't like sanctification. He wasn't slowly being sanctified, as that it was it. That was it. The moment he said, God said, you will have descendants as many as the stars, he was like, this is it. And he was made righteous by grace, by faith, by hope, by belief, by seeing, by understanding, by being told this. He was responding to that. I know that some say receive and some say accept grace. I guess I like receive better. That's more the Lutheran idea. So just as Abraham believed. And 8, it says, and I like this because he goes into this like back and forth. He's going to give us this little argument, back and forth argument in the next few verses. He goes, and the scriptures, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, declared that the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, all the Gentiles shall be blessed in you. For this reason, those who believe are blessed with Abraham who believed. Now, the cool thing about this is what was really said was all nations. And so when he says Gentiles, that means everybody, Jews and Gentiles, all nations. So it wasn't just, will be blessed through you. Some of these people said that the Spirit comes through only great works and piety, and if you want the Spirit, you must be a solid person. And if you're a good person, then you're a son of Abraham. You're a daughter of Abraham. If you do great righteous things, you're offspring of Abraham. Not a and they believed that circumcision completed that. That's what his critics would think, is that, well, Abraham was only complete once he was circumcised. But Paul really hits back on that pretty hard, and even more so in the book of Romans. So it's really interesting how Romans is almost like his second, like an amplified Galatians in some places. So you look at Abraham, who was also, in fact, a Gentile who was justified by faith. Abraham was probably used by Paul's critics to force works. And I mentioned already that Ishmael was also circumcised, because that's what they would have argued is, well, look at Ishmael, and so what did that do for him? So what the danger is here is that we only find completion through the law and through good works. And for me, in modern day, like bring that into now, for me, that would be through who you vote for, or who your politics sometimes is how you're seen as righteous, or if you're if you're evangelical, it's how conservative and sin avoidance you are, and maybe what you give to the homeless, and then in the progressive thing, it's how inclusive you are with certain groups of people, and who you give to the homeless, and you anti-war, and you do these things. And so these are we've turned these signs, like we would think would be signs, into proof, into our works, and or this is how we're good Christians, because we don't like those Christians, or we're not like them, or we're not the big everybody was deconstructing, and so you got to have the conservative evangelicals going, deconstruction is of the devil, and then you've got you've got the other ones going, no, you've got to deconstruct and blah, 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 and then you've got the confusion of deconstruction, or like just deconstruction is just basically just getting rid of your faith, which that isn't deconstruction either. Sorry. I mean, it could be an outcome of deconstruction, but it's not deconstruction. So Abraham is Old Testament, if someone's asking, and this is Paul referring to the Old Testament, because that's all they had. They didn't have, Paul wouldn't have had the New Testament. So here goes this back and forth. For all who rely on works or the law are under the curse, for it is written, cursed is everyone who does not observe and obey all things written in the book of the law. And you see this kind of idea of this modern day twist on this, is how we take this and go, oh, we're not following the Jewish law. We're following, we have a Christian law now that we set up, and we use that to demand people's certain actions, or certain purity, or certain way they love, or certain things like that, and there becomes a thing where the Spirit is really taken out of the equation. The idea of grace and the Spirit are taken out of the equation. And I think we can take faith, Spirit, and grace, and we can kind of let those three kind of marinate together for a second here, okay? And so he says here, and Paul says here in 10, for all who rely on the work of the law are under a curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not observe and obey all things written in the book of the law. Now, of course, no one's going to completely be able to follow the law, so he does that. Could be seen as a bit of a straw man, but Paul was also very prideful and said when he was a Pharisee, he followed the whole law. Here we go on. Now it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law. So this is the back and forth you see. You see 10, he says that, and he goes, now it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law. The one who is righteous will live by faith. But the law does not rest on faith. On the contrary, whoever does works of the law will live by them. And so Paul, a lot of people, when I was my early years of speaking and ministry and doing Christian festivals and being around mostly evangelicals in my earlier career, a lot of people would say, Jay, this message of grace is a slippery slope. Matter of fact, I was able to talk to my dad on the phone the other day, and he goes, I feel like you got too much, I gave you too much grace. And I'm like, well, it wasn't that you gave it to me, it was that you showed it to other people. But it was also that I became very interested in this concept of grace and looked into it and found that it was really amazing. And I figured that this Achilles heel of the law of works that come in different forms. And when it's the law, the next minute it's, it could be canceling people. Well, cancel culture could be part of the law. Well, we do that because we're the good ones, and we cancel these people because they deserve to be canceled. And all of a sudden grace is out of the equation. You see, there's no more grace. So that's a type of law too. So no one gets like this free pass of like legalism, because legalism is in right and left, and we so fondly want to think in that like dualistic way. But we all fall into this trap. There's always this need to create a law or to make sense of things, and to feel better about oneself, we have to kind of other people or scapegoat others. And Paul saying you can't scapegoat anybody anymore, because there was only one scapegoat, and that was Jesus. In Paul's mind, that's it. You can't, that's why there's no Jew nor Gentile, male or female. You can't scapegoat women anymore. You can't scapegoat men. You can't scapegoat children. You can't scapegoat slaves. That's all done with. And that's what's radical about what Paul's saying. I wish Paul said you need to free your slave, but Paul was saying something close, getting towards that, by saying they're your brothers and your sisters in Christ, and how you treat them is how you treat God. So there's this big, love your neighbor as yourself, love your enemy. How are you supposed to love this person? So you see some sort of radical inclusion being built over time. And for us to think that that's where it just stopped, and that we weren't to continually build off of that inclusion, is, to me, kind of crazy. And then the fact that we quite forget how easy it is for this our egos to get in and become, I'm trying to think of the word I want to use here, virtue signalers. And so virtue signaling almost becomes our new way of being heretics, or not heretics, Pharisees, or or us and them. And that can be either way. It can be like, for one side, it's wear and make America great again. For another side, it's, like me, I'll wear a peace symbol, or, stop war, or ceasefire. And these are all things that need to happen. And I'm more left than I am right, as most of you familiar with my work will know. But still, the point is that virtue signaling, these things aren't what brings upon the Spirit. These are not things that bring upon grace. These are not things that bring upon Christianity, or allow God, who I believe is the ground of being, to be within our lives and how we live our lives. Because it's simply just putting the cart before the horse. And I love it, because Paul says, now that it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law. And so, as I think, we have counterfeit love, but we also have the counterfeit law that we've recreated. But it literally says no one, nobody. You can sit all day and tell me how great you are. I watch some of these social justice warriors who I really agree with and love, but then I'll like read their comments, and people will say things, and they will, that maybe, well, what have you ever thought about this? And they will just snap and just cut that person down. And it bums me out, because I'm going like, man, you've got this great message, but if you're going to be so angry and carry this chip on your shoulder, which I know I've carried a lot of chips on my shoulder over time, ex-preacher's kid, fall on preacher's kid, and all that stuff. It's easy to, you become so angry that you can't really show grace anymore. You can't show people what led you there, because you're still so angry. And that was a time in my life where I was preaching grace, but I was so angry that there was probably no way anybody who wasn't agreeing with me, any of my dissenters or critics, were probably not really excited to sit down and talk with me. And now I've learned to care less about my own pain and being able to love others more and have conversations and disagree well, and even at times argue well. And I've been using disagree well a lot more lately, is because I had a few arguments a few months ago where I realized my passions got the better of me. And so I feel like we need to not jump right into arguing, but maybe learn to disagree well. We can disagree, you know. That's why, you know, with my family coming together right now, like we all don't see the same things, same theology, and we don't have all these same different ideas. But you know, my dad's really sick, and there's a chance we might lose him. And you know what? We're all coming together and we're talking, and it's taken a while. It's slow, but we're talking to each other. We love each other. We care about each other because this reminds us what's valuable in life. Not your political stance always, but just the stance of like, hi, oh, we can show compassion and love towards people that we don't agree with, that we might even think its messages are there are is an enemy to our own message. The righteous will live by faith, but the law does not rest on faith. On the contrary, whoever does works of the law will live by them. Then Paul goes in to do this whole thing again. Christ redeemed us. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming the curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. Now, what I want to look at this, and I think is interesting that we don't hear a lot, because, you know, I always hear stuff like, do you believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins? You know, and that used to be the one that, you know, that's, you know, and if you believe that, then I want you to come around down here. I want you to raise your hand. Every eye closed, every head bowed, close your eyes, no one looking around, you know, and they do that whole thing and then tell you that you have to walk down at the after the prayer. Anybody who denies me before man, you know, it's always that trick. It's like, wait, I was going to get saved in private. Now I have to be saved in public. And now I have to stop listening to Marilyn Manson and listen to DC Talk. Oh, Lord, what's happening? I remember I had like this little onyx cross that I bought at some hippie shop, and the pastor was like, you got to take that off, brother, and surrender it to Jesus. You know, it was like all of a sudden everything cool is like not cool anymore, you know. But what you don't hear is that, you know, Jesus died for our legalism. Jesus died for our religious acts. Jesus died for our for the law, for our works. Jesus died for our works, so we don't have to do them. Jesus died so we could be set free from the law. You know, that is something you don't hear a lot, and you don't. You know, a lot of people don't take the Old Testament law and start putting it with the new law. But anything that says that this work, this deal, what you're doing makes you in or out, is automatically living in works. And I see a lot of folks in progressive churches who are kind of work based, and they don't even realize it. And I think one of the reasons is because a lot of people in the progressive church don't like the Apostle Paul and think that he's like a legalistic, homophobic, heterosexist bastard. And that's a huge mistake in my mind. First of all, you got to realize what's not Paul, what's reactionary Paul. You also have to realize when Paul was living. And you go, Paul didn't like gays. Well, Paul also thought sorcerers were walking around like, hello, I have magic and curses, and, you know, and believed in things like that. So you have to live in this reality of good news. So a lot of times when you don't see, a lot of the times when I tell people like, oh, I really love Paul, I'm more of a Paulinian Christian, a lot of my progressive brothers are, I'm red letter Christian, I want you to read the red letters, which is cool. I mean, I get it. But the red letters are written a lot longer after, and there might be some things we need to talk about. But yeah, okay, I get it. But we also need to look at Paul, but we also need to look at who Paul was and actually allow Paul to be Paul. You know, Paul never mentions hell either. And there are books that Paul that did, you know, pastoral epistles are all forgeries written by someone pretending to be Paul writing to people who were pretending to be writing to people who were already dead. Okay. And there's a lot of apologists who have figured ways to like make that cool and okay, and well, that's why it fits in the Bible, and we should have it. To me, if I had like, you know, the J. Baker translation, I think those books would just, I'd have to have either a big asterisk beginning of each one, or just exclude them altogether. And there's parts of Corinthians that need to be looked at as well. There's more than that, but those are the ones that really stick in my mind as far as Paul's reading. And so I think we lose this concept of Paul here in Galatians, where he's saying, you're children of Abraham. Christ has died to set you free, not just for your sins, but to set you free from this law. You don't have to virtue signal to prove that you belong to God. There is no proof. You know, they talk about the fruits of the Spirit, but the fruits of the Spirit aren't actions as much as it is peace and patience. Now, kindness and joyful, kindness is an action, I guess, and joyfulness, but it's more of the Spirit. What do you see in people? So when you see people who are not practicing, you know, who aren't at peace, who aren't joyful, who are, you know, are angry all the time, or causing division, you know, because the division is usually has something to do with, well, my version of Christianity is, and we've gotten so stuck on creating a new law and trying to find the right version of Christianity that we have like hundreds of denominations, hundreds of different types of Christianity, you know. And I almost think one of the greatest ways to have a reformation would just be like close down all the church buildings and do more stuff like this, where we have people communicating with each other, people disagreeing well, and just saying like, okay, we got to rethink this. We've got to allow people to have interpretations, as long as these interpretations aren't making this faith some sort of an exclusive thing, that's not creating it into a special club, and it's not isolating people and not pushing people away because they're LGBTQ, or because, you know, whatever is going on in their lives. Because what we're saying is that those things become bigger than the gift of the Spirit. They become bigger than Christ. They become bigger than grace. It's saying that grace, those things aren't quite accomplished. And in some ways, you could actually look at some ways people think about the New Testament. You could actually see Christ as bad news, because Paul talks about, you know, God was being completely fair when he did not punish those who sinned in former times. And now all of a sudden Jesus comes, and now we have hell, and we have eternal punishment, and it's all the individual particular torture chambers that we mostly get from books outside of the Bible. But you know, you get all this stuff, and all of a sudden it's not like, wait a second, I've been forgiven, but not really, and I'm gonna forget if I have to think this way, and I have to do this, and I have to do that. And you know what? There's people who could argue this with me, and I would love to argue with them. Have me on your podcast. I'm glad to have a conversation. I'm glad to disagree well. I'm glad to debate. And I'm glad to do it in a loving, caring way. Anybody, anywhere, anytime. I don't care if you have doctorates or don't have doctorates. I'm all self-taught. I'm also open to really being wrong. But I will say, for me, the Achilles heel of Christianity is to always recreate the law. Always to have a box. Always to want to have perimeters. Always to want to have some sort of control, because we don't really believe that there is a God that is in control, or that God is the ground of being, or that Christ is Christ is good, Christ is in control. But, you know, all of a sudden we stop forgiving people, or we start canceling people, or we start attacking other people because their beliefs are different than us, or their skin color is different than us, or their sexuality is different from us. And, well, you're not in because grace isn't good enough for you, because those actions and those works will nullify. Your bad works will nullify. And Jesus said, I've saved you from the law. If I've saved you from the law, then I've saved you from good works and bad works. And see, both good works and bad works are these constant negotiations of do it yourself. I don't need grace. I don't need that. Now, what happens is you get the conservatives who are afraid that grace is a license to sin. Ooh, it's a slippery slope. Now, Paul's saying, I'm afraid the law is a license to fall away from God. And then you've got my progressive brothers and sisters who think grace is this license, they say cheap grace, and they go, oh, it's a license to not do anything. You're not going to love your neighbor, and you're not going to feed the homeless, and you're not going to care about the less fortunate person. And so, you know, so both sides have their own way of thinking like grace is a slippery slope. And then, you know, but how do you forgive someone like Donald Trump? How do you forgive that guy? That's my best bottle of Trump I got. You know, or how do you forgive people who are doing this or doing that? And you're going like, man, okay, well, why don't we have some tough conversations about this rather than becoming like the anti-evangelical, like it's just the negative. It's like the Flash. You guys remember the character of the Flash? And then there's negative Flash, and he's yellow, and he's got, instead of a yellow lightning bolt, he's got a red lightning bolt, and he's like the complete opposite. Um, I mean, that's what we've become. You know, it's like our twin brother, like the twin evil brother, the progressive, or whoever you think the bad guy has the twirly mustache. You know, like the evangelical comes in with the twirly mustache. You know, and then the progressive comes in with Birkenstocks. He's like, "Yeah," and a goatee. Who's good and who's bad, you know? But ultimately, your people, you're the same people. So Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law. Does not say here that Christ saved us from our sins, but that's the law. The laws who put us into sin. It was this law. It's this works. It's this box of control that has thrown us into this concept of sin and missing the mark constantly. We got to get rid of it. And they fought about it. Paul and James fought about it. Paul and Peter fought about it. They even fight about it in Acts. Like this was such a new thing and it's such a new concept that this was being argued out. You know, so arguing about grace versus law versus works is not a new concept. You know, the apostles were like trying to figure it out as well, because they're going like, we came from this and now we've got this, and what do we do? And is it too much freedom? And what if we got to put together a food program or we're all going to starve to death, you know? And and that's good, because that is remembering what happened. Now, I'm about to hit you with the end of this thing, but I wanted to kind of take you on that little trip there. So then in 14, he goes, in order that Christ Jesus, the blessing of Abraham, might come to the Gentiles, so that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. So Paul is arguing with them, saying, getting circumcised isn't going to fulfill Abraham's promise. Not getting circumcised is going to, you know, this is their argument, you know. This was a big big deal at the time. It would be like us arguing over all the shit we are. There's too many to choose from. That we argue, things we argue about. I mean, politics, I guess, is the one that's the most is kind of gross right now, and the fact that so many innocent people are dying in wars all over the world, not just in 2 wars, but like lots of wars where people are being massacred. But whatever the media shows us, those wars is all horrific. But we've been saved from all. So what he's saying is, in order for Christ Jesus to be blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles, so that we might receive the promise, the Spirit, through faith. And Paul is arguing is that Abraham, even though he did good things, it was the Spirit, it was the gift of the Spirit, it was the faith and the hope and the belief that allowed him to do that. It was him seeing the truth and receiving it. That he was accepted. In my notes here, you know, I wrote like, and Paul's using all this. He's quoting Genesis 18:18 and Romans 4. So so here where Paul says, you know, use Abraham for the nations, or to reach nations or Gentiles, Paul ends up going to use it all in Romans 4. So Paul gets even more inclusive in Romans. So it's not something where these pastoral epistles. I had one of my buddies who was a biblical pastor be like, well, don't you just think that Paul just got more conservative with his old age? And I'm like, no, these just aren't the book. I mean, just read most scholars and they will agree with me that these are forgeries. And if you don't agree, you know, just Paul's arguing that everything he said earlier on, it doesn't add up anymore. He sets up a hierarchy. He's torn down a whole hierarchy, a whole law, and now he's creating brand new laws in these pastoral epistles. And so a lot of bad theology, a lot of hate, and a lot of anger is ignorance. And now we make ignorance sound like it means like shithead, fucker, you know, like something really bad, you know. But ignorance is just not knowing yet. So some people are ignorant to that and they go, well, this is part of it, so I must need to take it. Do you see what I'm saying? Like we make ignorance, like I remember the years ago they had a sign that said, there was this, I don't know if it was anti-sex thing or anything, but it said virgin and it was spray painted. And then it's like, why does this look like a bad word, you know? And repentance, you know, we make repentance into these bad things. And ignorance is just not knowing. I'm ignorant of a lot of things in this world. A lot of people suffering, a lot of even things biblically, there are things that I am ignorant about that I still have to learn. But a lot of people are ignorant because they haven't gone into the deeper dive. And unfortunately, a lot of those people were the ones who told me to do it, and I took it really seriously, so I just went crazy nuts and started reading that, and then I started reading philosophy, and then once you get into scholarship, you just go, you know. And what's wild is so many people lose their faith when they realize that the Bible's not 100% perfect or things like that. A lot of people who leave you know, seminary because they go like, and then they come back and then they just compromise. For me, it was the opposite way. It was like, oh, this gets better. You know, this gets better once you realize that these books are, I've always struggled and these aren't even actually, okay, no wonder he was this sound so like anti his message. Some may object because they believe that nearly all the law keepers believe in God. But for Paul, they do not depend on God's grace, the gift. So, you know, you could say, well, don't people who keep the law believe in God, and isn't that enough? And he's saying, but they're not relying on grace. They're relying on themselves. They're relying on their knowledge. They're relying on having the answers. They're relying on whatever side they're on being right. So, someone just asked me, what's the purpose of free will? Why don't you ask philosophers about that if you want to really get deep into that? Or Calvinists. There's another group of people who like to, you know, who don't. So you could actually see there's another thing that could bring in free will versus predestination and all this stuff. Like, what is all this? What's the point? If we're all saved, where's the free will? I don't know. I think everybody being saved is way better than having free will. Ooh. Love your neighbor. Be kind to people. Feed hungry people. Stop suffering. Use your free will for that. So Paul's saying, like, these people who are doing all this law thing are doing it and not depending on grace. And he's saying you got to depend on grace. You've got to accept that you're accepted. Usually, this year we'll do it again. We'll go into Paul Tillich's talk on grace called "You Are Accepted" after this, because I think it's a good way for us to really grasp what's been said about grace and what the message of grace really is. So once we get rid of this prohibition and duty, and we go, okay, all things are all things are acceptable. All things are acceptable, but not all things are beneficial. All things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. That's the verse I'm thinking of right now. So, like, do whatever you want. God loves you. Take that free will and go crazy with it. But it's not all beneficial. And trust me, I've learned that in my life. And it was when I learned that kind of concept is when I got sober, when it wasn't about God or about religion. When it was just about going like, this is not beneficial for my life. Because their prohibition of thinking that it was somehow supernatural, godly thing of like, this is what's keeping me from God and keeping me accepted from God, it had such a great power. But when that prohibition fell to the side and the duty fell to, and I went, oh my God, I'm loved, I'm accepted. Now, I have grace. It's there. I'm loved, I'm cherished by that which is greater than me. I said, oh, I want to start doing things that are beneficial for my life. I'm going to start reading learning about Greek and Hebrew and biblical history and philosophy and theology. And I'm going to start reading like the history of the Bible. And then I'm going to start reading books about all these different things and questions I've always had about, and then I'm going to start trying to understand scholarship. And now I'm not going to think of the Bible in a sixth grade level anymore, which a lot of us do. I mean, a lot of us think of a lot of, sorry, I got lost my train of thought there. Anyway, oh, so as long, so when that became not an issue, then I was able to say I'm gonna read more. I'm gonna get sober because I want to do this with my life, because I want to tell everybody about the good news, because I want to tell everybody about the grace. So I see someone asking me about the free will. I guess maybe that's it, is that when I got grace, I was realized I had the will to say, I don't really want to drink anymore, and I want to spend the rest of my life studying the Bible in the most in-depth possible ways. And I want to look at every aspect of Christianity and other faiths, and I want to look into philosophy and see what philosophers have to say about it. And I have dyslexia. I have really bad learning disabilities, and so I had to be able to do that on my own time. It wasn't somewhere where I could really go into a school and do that. So sometimes when I'm studying, I need TV on, or I need, like I'll put on like a Sherlock Holmes. I've been watching Elementary lately. I'll put on Elementary, and then I'll do my studying, because my mind is all over the place, that I kind of need something for like the weird negative stuff to just, you go over the TV, and the rest of us are going to focus on this, scholarship. So I guess that's where free will comes in, is that I didn't really have free will until I realized that I was accepted. And so when I realized I was accepted, there it is. Once I realized that it wasn't an answer book, once I realized it wasn't a key to heaven, a ticket to heaven. And I have to use my free will to stand up to people who I love and care about, who think I might be going to hell because I believe the way I do. So I guess that's where free will could come into it, I practice every day, try to make a living doing this because I want to feed my kids and take care of them as well. And I, look at part-time jobs and try to do other stuff to bring in income, and do work around my apartment complex to help pay my rent. So, because I want to be a good dad. But when that prohibition and that duty goes away, because it's no longer God's prohibition, or that need to do something to impress God or make God happy. I mean, I feel like my dad spent so many years of his life building a just huge PTL empire because he wanted to make God happy. Because that is what religion tells so many of us to do, is, build these beautiful structures for God, or do these great works for God, and it causes us to lose that focus of love and acceptance and inclusion in others. But Paul knew grace produced transformation. Now remember where I said, let's put spirit and faith and grace in a little bowl and let it simmer? Huh? Well, there we go. I'm letting it simmer right now because I'm going to say it in the wake. Paul knew that the Spirit produced a transformation. Paul knew that faith produced a transformation. Paul knew grace allowed transformation. And so that's the great thing, is when you take away the do's and the don'ts and the rule books and the commandments, and you go, something happens. I wasn't able to really want much to do with God until I realized God loved me and didn't hate me, and that it wasn't about the law, and that I was free to be drunk in the corner at the dance club all night long, or reading really hard books with my learning disabilities. It was as soon as those prohibitions and those duties were taken away from me that I was able to love my neighbor. I mean, how many people do you think don't love their gay kids and their gay family members because it's based on prohibition that the church has made, and that misinterpretations of biblical texts, not knowing that the first time it showed up in the Bible was in 1946, not realizing that our concepts of sexuality really come from Freud, and Freud wasn't alive at those times. How many of people of prohibition of alcohol have kept people away from their loved ones and people they cared about? How many times is this prohibition of thinking that God wanted races separated or things like that have kept people from each other? You know, and you take away that and go, oh, you know, all is permissible. Maybe it's not all beneficial, but all is permissible. And you take those things down and you have these conversations and people get humanized. You know, it reminds me when we went out to Chicago to that really big mega church in Chicago and had a meeting with Soul Force with them. And I'm trying to remember the pastor's name. I can't remember his name right now off the top of my head or the name of the church. But we went there and we just had tough conversations. We even had some arguing well. And you know what? After we left, they didn't take a stance and go like, oh, we're gay affirming. But what they did do is they got rid of all their reparative therapy stuff. They got rid of all those groups. They got rid of, you know, Exodus and all those things. They said, okay, we're going to get rid of this because we know that this isn't helping anyone. So there you go. I've got more rings on than a pimp. Wow, hey, look, the blob is here. I go on YouTube and make fun of people. Oh, so good. Yeah, thank you. I really like silver. My friend gave this to me. It's actually a replica of the ring that, what's his name wore? What was his name? We have the same birthday, from the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards. Thank you. I like them. We're not close to a mega church at all, but thank you. Dr. King over there. Yeah, that's Dr. King. We haven't got anybody who came in and messed with us lately, so it's kind of fun to have you drop. Thanks for dropping in. Welcome to church. You're now officially a member. I'd like to thank the mob. Play nice with others. We really do try to argue well and disagree well. So faith, for me, growing up, though, the word faith included works when I was growing up. And we got it wrong, and we still have it wrong. You know? So there you go. Oh, gosh. All right. Well, we're going to ask the blob to leave because it seems like he's a racist, and we have a racist here. And I don't prefer, we don't really have a lot of room for racism. We would love to help you not be a racist in any way, but that would probably be us introducing yourself and letting us know who you are and becoming a part of the community. I will say, hey, you're loved and accepted, but we really don't appreciate that type of thing, and that's too bad. Usually I just ignore people like this, but I'm tired, I'm exhausted, my dad's dying. You know, and now I'm more of a Marxist than a Democrat, but thanks, buddy. So yeah, so anyway, we keep going, and we got to show this type of love and this type of grace so people like the blob can get loved and accepted and change and realize that they don't have to go in and take a shit in the middle of a conversation, you know, because we do that because we're hurt, because we're insecure, because we're angry, and because there's the this and us and them mentality. For exactly, you know, like, oh, why is it, well, you have so many silver rings? Did you steal them from Martin Luther King? Because he's a black man and he must wear a lot of rings. You know, so that's too bad. But here, that's the evidence. So that's kind of some more evidence of our talk of the us and them thoughts and the us and them ideas. And hopefully we can change that and be better at it and show more love and show more grace and all that good stuff. So thanks everybody for coming this week. It's great to have you here. We're going to go deeper. We're not finishing. Obviously, we didn't finish Galatians 3 because I'm doing such an in-depth study that we're going to try and do more of that coming up. We are going to do more of that. And there's a few more parts that are really good in Galatians 3, and we're going to do a bit more of an in-depth study on that and continue that. Sorry, everybody. I was already kind of feeling weary this morning, like when I got the call about my dad. And so I'm not always going to handle people being sad, people being mean as well as I need to be. So I also need that grace as well, because it's easy to just want to take the hurt and the pain that you're feeling and point it towards somebody else. Projection doesn't really help all that well. Yeah, we'll be back next week with Galatians, maybe, because the kids have school off this week. So the study has been so in depth that I might not have time to completely get what we need together. Hopefully I can get the rest of 3 together. If not, we'll find something to work on and do. Yeah, we can't do this without you guys. So if you want to help support us, you can go to revolutionchurch.com and you can Venmo. We have the Venmo and the PayPal. It's tax deductible. As you know, we're just kind of keeping our head above water, and we can do this work with you. And I think that our community is helping bring reformation and change slowly, but I think we're bringing that and helping people change. And hopefully we can continue to do that. So there you go. Yeah, please. Yeah, we really could. You know what? I mean, heck, there you go. I'm going to agree with the blob. Revolution really needs your funds, because we need to pay bills. We got to pay the people who do our bills. We don't have a building. We don't have anything like that, but we do have to make bills meet. We have to raise our budget this year, which is smallest budget we've ever had, and we're trying to do that. So, please think about that, because we really do want to do more, and we can't do it just by that. So, hey, folks, love you guys. I'm going to focus on the love. I'm going to focus on the grace. And thank you all for coming. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Oh, great. Oh, nope, that didn't work. All right. Oh. Okay, one more time. Having issues with the phone. There we go. Hold on a second. There we go. All right.